Imagine for a moment that you show up in your leadership role today and that you have the opportunity to rescue someone from a bad decision they're about to make. Let's say, for the purpose of argument, that the decision will be inconvenient to you or your organization, that the decision will waste time and potentially even cost money, but that it wouldn't be disastrous. Do you step in and rescue that person from making that poor decision? Today's guest will not answer that question for us. However, today's guest will challenge all of us to ask that question in a different way and think through frameworks to help us make a better decision. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode number 92.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Hello to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. This is a weekly coaching show to help people be better leaders through improved communications, human relations, and personal productivity. When I first became a leader and a manager, I made some poor choices, as many of us do when we get into leadership management roles for the first time. And one of the areas I struggled with extensively was having difficulty when decisions weren't black and white decisions. I always wanted to be able to check the box. Yes, no, black, white. And I found that I would struggle in situations where I sometimes needed to make that call in that gray zone as a leader or as a manager. And I didn't really know how to handle that. And I've found over the years that not only do I still struggle with that on occasion, but that a lot of others, leaders, struggle with that as well. And today's guest is someone who has done a tremendous amount of thinking on something that he calls practical wisdom, and how we can utilize practical wisdom as leaders, but also as parents, as family members, as friends in our lives in order to get better results and to make better decisions. You may have read his work as doing editorials in the New York Times. You may have seen TED Talks by him. You may have read his books. But if you haven't heard Barry Schwartz talk on practical wisdom, you should. And the first time I heard about him online and watched one of his TED Talks, I knew that he was someone I wanted to talk with and learn more about his thinking on practical wisdom and how we could take his wisdom and apply it to situations that we face as leaders every single day. So here's my interview with Barry Schwartz. I'm really pleased to welcome as my guest this week, Barry Schwartz. Barry is the Dorwin Cartwright Professor of Social Theory and Social Action at Swarthmore College, and he is also the author of the book Practical Wisdom, The Right Way to Do the Right Thing. And I came across Barry originally on from his TED Talk. He actually has a couple of TED Talks online, and the one that caught my attention was the one called Our Loss of Wisdom. Someone had sent it to me a while back and really captured my attention. And so, Barry, I'm so pleased to welcome you on the show. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Dave.
You know, I really enjoyed your TED Talk, and as I listened to it, I was thinking, this is something that every leader should listen to and internalize, because I think that your thoughts on practical wisdom are things that get a lot of us in trouble when we take on leadership roles.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, one reason why I was so excited about being able to talk about it at TED is that it struck me that this is an audience full of people who actually manage many people themselves. And if they took what I had to say to heart, it could have effects that reverberated in a dramatic way.
Yeah, it is one of the privileges that both of us have of having an audience that follows us, is having the ability to influence others. And so I'm really excited to talk with you about your thinking and some of the research you've done around practical wisdom. And before getting too far along, Plato said the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. And so your most recent book is titled Practical Wisdom. I'm wondering how you define practical wisdom in your work.
Yes, and so Plato said that, and the truth is that we never really, in the book, which by the way I wrote with my friend and colleague Kenneth Sharp, we never really quite define what practical wisdom is. We try to define it by example, but what Aristotle said it was is knowing the right way to do the right thing at the right time. And the key point here is the word practical, because Plato was interested in sort of abstract wisdom, the sort of thing we imagine that people with long white beards sitting on top of mountains have to dispense. So sort of general abstract principles about how the world works. And Aristotle was interested very much in the here and now and the concrete. He watched tradespeople, craftspeople solving their practical problems and generalized from that to how human beings solve their practical problems with one another. So the critical thing was, for Aristotle, was what he called the priority of the particular, which is to say that every situation and every person is unique. And if you have a template that you simply impose on whatever situation you find, it will get you decent results much of the time, but it will almost never get you great results.
Oh, interesting. That resonates with me a lot because I've been, especially earlier in my career, the master of creating templates for every situation. And you're absolutely right. There's times that works, a lot of times it works good, but it got me in a lot of trouble early in my career. And I learned pretty quickly that that's not always the best way to make wise decisions.
I think that's right. But I think the reason that people rely on templates is that it's a way of keeping them out of trouble, in the sense that if you use your judgment and you deviate from a template and things go wrong, whose fault is it? It's yours. Whereas if you follow the template and things go wrong, whose fault is it? Well, it's whoever invented the template. Yeah. So it's a way of sort of abdicating responsibility simply to go by the script or go by the rules.
You've highlighted the phenomenon that when things aren't going right, the first reaction of a lot of leaders and organizations is to make more rules, make more templates. And you make the argument that isn't always the best answer. Why is it that can be problematic to create more rules or more structures or policies?
Okay, so let me back up just a step and then I'll explain it. What Ken and I did was we took this concept of practical wisdom and divided it into two components. One component is the will to do the right thing, that is actually wanting to do right by your patients, your clients, your customers, your students, whatever, your friends. And the second component was the skill to figure out what the right thing is. So the problem with relying on rules or templates is that they are substitutes for skill. That is, instead of using judgment, you apply the template. So in my own life, I teach lots of students. They're all bright. They're not all equally bright. They're all motivated. They're not all equally motivated. Mm-hmm. Some of them need a kick in the pants. Some of them need nothing but encouragement. If I had a formula for how I interacted with my undergraduates, the formula would be right, I guess, for the average student, but most students are not the average student. So it would end up being wrong for almost every student I actually had contact with. And the trouble is that to exercise judgment, you need to have judgment. And the way you get judgment is by trying things and failing and learning from your mistakes, so that if you're slavishly committed to a template, you're no wiser after doing it for 20 years than you were the day you started.
Got it.
And that's why I think resorting to templates gets us in trouble. But on the other hand, when the financial system collapsed, you could see why people thought you need to regulate the bankers. Because, in fact, by deregulating the financial industry, we made this incredible collapse possible. It couldn't have happened without deregulation. So the first impulse is to re-regulate. The mistake is to think that by doing that, you will have solved the problem.
I mentioned a moment ago when I started my career, I really looked at everything very much in the black and white. And I know I was shocked when it seemed like following all the company policies and procedures, which I always tried to do, didn't always result in the best outcomes. And you've said a wise person knows when and how to make the exception to every rule.
And that's right. That's just one respect in which you use your judgment instead of following
Sure.
the template. There are good rules, but there are times when you have to ignore or deviate from the rules. So to take a concrete example, I think it's a good rule for doctors to follow to be honest with their patients. Tell your patients the truth. The paternalistic days of the past are over. Tell your patients the truth. Fine. But we all know that there are some patients where telling them the truth will be a disaster because the truth is bad. You've got bad news to deliver. And they when they hear this news, they may simply disintegrate. And what could be a life, a sort of a decent life if you have a terminal disease for 2, 3, 4 years until you finally succumb to the disease, basically becomes the news becomes your death sentence. And you simply collapse into, panic, sadness, and what have you. So sometimes with some patients, finding a way to shade the truth to enable them to get through a very hard time and make the best of a terrible situation is the right thing to do. And you need to be attuned to the needs and the temperaments of individual patients to know which patient is the one where you deviate from the rule, where you improvise around the rule. So that's one example of the kind of thing I think we need. Now notice this only works if you know your patients. And as we all know, nowadays doctors don't know their patients very well because they have 8-minute office visits. They practice as part of large groups, never see the same doctor twice. So nobody knows anybody. And when you're in that situation, of following a rule like tell the truth is probably the best you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, this is kind of this interesting paradox because I know one of the questions that people would ask is, as they're thinking about how to navigating this, on one hand, most people argue, and you certainly do as well, that we need appropriate rules and policies and organizations. And on the other hand, for all the reasons you've discussed, if we excessively rely on that rule or that template or that script, that's problematic too. So what advice do you have for us as we're trying to navigate that, and what kind of things should we be considering in order to figure out the difference between those?
Right. So here's where that second component of wisdom comes in critically, the will to do the right thing. If your aims are not actually to serve whoever it is, clients, patients, students, then you can easily deviate from rules, not because you think it's going to make the person you're dealing with better off, but because you think it's going to make you better off. Mm-hmm. And under conditions like that, I'd want as many rules as possible, right? If the people you're dealing with don't have your interests at heart, you really want to hamstring them and constrain them. If they do have your interests at heart, I guess the answer is you look for signs in individual people you're dealing with that this is a different situation from the one that's described by the rule. Mm-hmm. And there's no guarantee you're going to get it right. Sometimes you'll treat someone as an exception who shouldn't be treated as an exception. You have to be prepared when you use your judgment to make mistakes, to get things wrong. But what you're aspiring to is excellence in the way you treat patients, students, and clients instead of mediocrity. Following rules gets you mediocrity. Trying to use your judgment at least affords the chance that you can do better than mediocre. But there's no formula. I wish I could tell you this is a clear-cut sign to abandon the rule. There are no clear-cut signs. It's always ambiguous. And you get better and better at it, I assume, with more and more experience working with people.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that as a lesson for me listening to you speak and hearing your TED Talk is that, it's not always just about the black and the white. So knowing that there are times that maybe it makes sense to think about something that's, forgive the cliche, out of the box or something different than we might normally do. And I love to use the analogy of jazz music as a template for how sometimes people make decisions of, yes, the music's on the page. At the same time, the greatest musicians know how to improvise and change things up and make decisions in the moment when they need to.
That's exactly, we use that exact analogy in the book. I don't remember if I mentioned it in the TED Talk, but yes, there are notes on the page, but what makes jazz jazz is not the notes on the page, it's the improvisation around those notes. And I guess what wisdom is a kind of moral improvisation. Rules are like the notes on the page, and without them, you'd have nothing but chaos. But rules are not the end of the story, they're the beginning of the story. Another kind of metaphor that I sometimes use is that rules are like a road map that gets you to the right city, but doesn't have any streets marked. Now, you'll never find the particular street you're looking for unless you get to the right city. So a road map that gets you to the right city is helpful, but it's not the end of the story.
Yeah.
You get to the right city, the rules get you in the right ballpark. Now you have to use your judgment to figure out exactly what this situation calls for.
I know you make the case that wise leaders are made, not born. So what can each of us do, not only to increase our own practical wisdom, but also the wisdom of those that we're leading and we're influencing?
I think that's a great question, and it's a challenging one because people who manage other people are reluctant to do what needs to be done, which is to let go and let people use their initiative and autonomy and learn from their own mistakes, and as a result get wiser and wiser in doing their jobs. You're kind of looking over their shoulders, you're trying to prevent complete catastrophes, but you have to let people use their judgment and develop better judgment through a process of trial and error. And I think that's extremely threatening to managers because they can't bear the thought of a mistake. In addition to which, if they succeed, then their job becomes less and less important because they're basically creating people who don't need to be managed. Nobody wants to work their way out of a job.
Yeah. This is I think you've hit on a huge fear for a lot of leaders is that, contrary to kind of what we should be doing as leaders, a lot of times we are kind of trying to keep all that wisdom we feel like we need to know it all and people need to do it our way and follow our process. And I'm still amazed not only how much time I catch myself doing that, but catch people doing that of we're just getting out of the, hey, it's not just about how I'm supposed to do it. It's about empowering people to make their own decisions, make their own mistakes too.
We all are susceptible to this. And it's not just in our professional lives. It's very hard to convince parents that it's important for them to let their kids make mistakes. That the job of a parent basically is to be a life preserver or a safety net so that the mistakes aren't catastrophic. But ideally you want to raise your children so that they stop needing you.
Yeah.
But the consequence of that goal is that there will be bumps and bruises along the way. There's a wonderful book written by a therapist named Wendy Mogul called The Blessings of a Skinned Knee. And it's all about how parents need to let their kids get hurt and just make sure that when they get hurt, they don't get hurt very badly. And the book is meant for sort of upper class, highly educated parents whose mission in life seems to be to make sure their kids never have a bad day. And that raises essentially helpless and non-resilient adults. So you see it when you're trying to be a parent, you see it when you're trying to be a romantic partner, you see it when you're trying to manage a workforce. The temptation to over-control is overwhelmingly strong, and it has to be resisted.
And Barry, my wife Bonnie's an undergraduate professor, and so she sees this a lot, and I'm sure you do as well too, of just these so much of this comes back to a lot of the parenting, and so many parents these days have really shielded kids from making a lot of those mistakes, and then they show up in university and then their late teens, early 20s, and very not sure how to handle the world in a lot of situations. And it's interesting how much as leaders now we're starting to see a lot of that in our organizations too.
I think that's absolutely true. I have noticed in the last decade that the students I teach are much less resilient and much less independent than they used to be. And Swarthmore, where I teach, gets the best students in the country. So they're highly motivated, they're very smart, but they just don't know what to do when things go wrong because nothing has ever gone wrong. or at least fewer things have gone wrong than used to be the case when parents had a slightly more hands-off approach to child rearing.
So Bonnie and I have a 16-month-old right now, so I'm going to have you come over and remind me of this next time.
Well, I think at 16 months you want to you want to be very protective.
As we are.
The trouble is when people treat their 16-year-olds the same way they treat their 16-month-olds.
Yeah, because at some point you need to make that transition, and it is a gradual transition. I think that the same thing is so true for leaders too, is that, there's that kind of that parental or, that kind of leadership role a lot of us take when someone shows up in our organization the first day. And, we should very appropriately walk them through some things and teach them about the organization. But a lot of leaders never make that transition to then backing off and allowing people to make their own mistakes and allowing them to grow wisdom, like you've said, and let them be autonomous. And that's, I think it's a big mistake a lot of us make.
Yeah, but look, it's very hard to manage yourself out of a job, which is in effect what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, for sure.
As a university professor, your aim is to teach kids how to teach themselves, so that school doesn't end after 4 years. They remain students for the rest of their lives. But that, of course, if you're good at that, then you become unnecessary because you've done such a good job teaching them how to teach themselves that they don't need you anymore. And nobody likes the thought that that's what they're doing, is they're making themselves unnecessary. Yeah. But I think that's what good leaders need to do.
There's a great quote from, I think it's Lao Tzu, something to the effect, I'm not going to get it right, but the best leader, when his or her work is done, their aim fulfilled, says that the people who they lead will say, we did it ourselves. Yeah. And yet that's counterintuitive to what a lot of the things we see in our culture and our organizations.
Absolutely so.
So, you are someone that brings a lot of wisdom into your work. You've had a very successful career. I'm wondering, what's a time in your life, Barry, that someone was an example of wisdom for you, and what did they do?
Well, you gave me a heads up on that question, and I can't really answer it, because the truth is that this whole framework for understanding how to lead people, how to teach people, I didn't become self-conscious about it until just a few years ago. I had various mentors along the way who differed from one another in this regard. Some of them were quite controlling. I loved them at the time. They were motivating and exciting, but also controlling. And then there were others who were much more laissez-faire. In retrospect, I would say I learned more from the laissez-faire mentors than I did from the controlling ones, because without these laissez-faire people in my own development, I would never have been able to do my own work independently. So I think, but I wouldn't have said that to you at the time. It's only in the last 5 years that this has really become salient to me, and it's caused me to rethink the way I teach myself, and to examine whether I'm too controlling or too worried that kids will make mistakes or anything like that. And I've actually modified the way I teach as a result of having thought about these issues.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, I just give, I'm much more attentive to the needs of individual students. And I try to give them enough rope, not to hang themselves, but to sort of become independent thinkers and independent scholars. I just assumed that if you told people what you knew, they would simply, by simple process of maturation, they'd become more and more independent. But that, I think, was a mistake. I co-taught a class on wisdom with my co-author, Ken Sharp, and he's masterful at leading group discussions where, when a bunch of students are talking, they go off the topic, they sometimes say the wrong thing. And my impulse is always to jump right in and correct every mistake. And that very quickly becomes a whole bunch of people, each of them talking to me instead of talking to one another. He's patient. He lets them make mistakes. He lets them digress. They, in fact, talk to one another. They're much more engaged as a result. And at some point, he kind of reels the conversation back in and reminds people of why we're actually talking about what we're talking about. So I learned a lot from watching him about how to be a wise manager of student interactions in a classroom. I would say that the things I've been thinking about in recent years have just caused me to revise my assessments of people who've been important in my own intellectual development.
Well, a sign of a good leader for sure is someone who's aware of their strengths, but also aware of what they don't do effectively well, and then makes decisions in order to balance those things out. So, a great example of that. Hey, for folks who want to follow your work, in addition to grabbing your book, other ways that people can follow you or connect with you or find out more about what you're up to?
Well, I've just started blogging on LinkedIn.
Oh, great!
They've got a thing. I don't remember what they're called. Influencers.
Oh, that's awesome.
I am now an influencer on LinkedIn, and so I've been hosting something every week or so.
Congratulations! That's actually a really prestigious thing, and I've seen a few folks in the world who've gotten recognized by LinkedIn with that. So that's awesome. I'm definitely going to.
It is awesome, but Jack Welch does have a few more people following him than I have following me.
Well, same here.
But other than that, if they go to the Swarthmore College website, they can find my website, and when I think of it, I post recent written work there.
Great. And I'm going to go ahead and put links to all of those things in the show notes, the LinkedIn connection for Barry, the TED Talks, his book, of course, and that way folks can connect with you in whatever way works best for them. Barry, I really appreciate your time and your practical wisdom and coming on the show.
Thank you.
Barry Schwartz is the author of Practical Wisdom, The Right Way to Do the Right Thing. Barry, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure, Dave. Great talking to you.
So curiously, he didn't have a 7-step process for how to get yourself away from only following 7-step processes. As I was listening to him talk, I was thinking back to some of the early leadership roles that I had in my career, and even some of the situations I'm in now, and how I would always default to following the policies and procedures and what the rules said. And I always saw the rules as the end, the final decision point. And now I've grown to realize, at least in some way, that the rules are a lot of times what Barry talked about. They're the rules or policies, procedures get us in the ballpark. And sometimes we need to then add in our experience and our wisdom and make a judgment call that isn't always the same in every situation, because there are nuances and there are differences, and that's where the wisdom and the experience comes in, and the uncertainty. Really, leadership it's one of the hardest things of leading well. Is I have this belief that if we're always 100% confident in every decision we make as a leader, that either we've really outgrown our position, or we're just not really, pushing ourselves. We're just playing it safe. And you can be good doing that, but that you never really get to that level of greatness, of being willing to make a mistake, of being willing to learn and to gain wisdom. And then, like he said, of being able to turn around and to empower others to do that by sometimes stepping back. And that gets back to that question I posed earlier. Would you step in and rescue that person you're leading from making that mistake? And sometimes you should, and sometimes you shouldn't. And then there's times you'll just have to make that judgment call. And I hope today that this conversation didn't necessarily give you the answer to that question, but that will have you think about that question in a different way the next time it comes up, maybe later today. And if it did that, then I think this was a good use of our time today. And I hope that you will also jump in and join the conversation online as well. If you'd like to get more information about Barry and some of the resources we mentioned in the show, and he mentioned a book reference to The Blessings of a Skinned Knee, I'm going to put all those references on the show notes. His books, his TED Talks, the TED Talk in particular he did in 2009, I think is just kind of must listening for any leader as far as what are some of the things that you should be thinking about when you're making difficult decisions. And so go to coachingforleaders.com/92. That'll take you there. You can always also call in audio feedback to me, it's at the phone number 949-38-LEARN. So that's the best way to reach me by phone. And of course, you can email me too, feedback@coachingforleaders.com. So be sure to connect with me there as well if you'd like. Hey, I wanted to mention I'm doing something new starting, actually started last week. I'm getting a lot more questions over email and from the weekly articles, and I so appreciate getting questions. I love hearing from our listening community. So thank you so much for reaching out. It's great to talk to many of you online in the recent past. And so I've started up a new series now of weekly quick coach videos, and they're just like 2 or 3 minutes online, and to answer some questions that I've been getting online and things that people just ask me in my roles and teaching and my work with Dale Carnegie and my work in hosting this show. And so if that's something that you'd either be interested in listening to, or maybe you have a question of your own, check that out. There's a couple of really good ways to get there. One is to go to the website, coachingforleaders.com, and you'll see them go in the main feed there, but you can also click on the button that says watch at the very top of the page. That'll get you there. And then also you can follow me on social media, and I'll be posting them there as well. I'm going to probably post those toward the later end of the week, Thursday, Friday. So as you see those, feel free to check them out. And if they're helpful to you, great. And if you are looking for a question to be answered too, you can email to me anytime, feedback@coachingforleaders.com. Hey, speaking of social media, I want to say thank you to a whole bunch of people that followed me this week. And as always, apologies if I don't get your name perfect, and let me know if that's the case. Philippa Wiltus, Abdul Ralph, Randy Alvarez, Pika Peltonian, Maruela Diaz, Mark Severkrop, Julie Starnes, Greg Payne, Kelly Anderson, Ben Canoe, Khalil Kuradrat, Ignoe Cheneri Linda, and Akulye Evelina Hilma Nemery. Oh, no, let me get this last name right. Nemwenyo. Thanks so much for following me this week on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and any other social networks. Hey, if you'd like to stay connected as well, just go to coachingforleaders.com. You'll find all the social media icons at the top of the page there. Just feel free to connect at whatever one works best for you. I'd love to stay in touch with you that way. And also a very special thank you to the person who's got the screen name Flamewho for your really nice review on iTunes. Thank you so much for doing that. That is such a great way to help other people to find the show and for other people to build their leadership skills. It helps great with the traction of the show. So thank you very much for doing that. And if this show's been helpful to you and you use iTunes and you've been listening for a while and you'd like to leave a review, go to coachingforleaders.com/iTunes. And hey, if you'd like to hear from me midweek with another tool, resource, booster shot that'd be helpful to you to improve your communications, human relations, or personal productivity, I send out the email article every week. Just go to coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. And that'll get you onto that weekly article. Again, coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. And in the meantime, I hope you have a great week. I look forward to continuing to talk with you in the coming weeks. We've got lots of great guests coming up. And in the meantime, have fun leading.